She never meant to buy a dying restaurant. She only had $100 left, barely enough to keep her daughter warm for another night. But fate has a strange way of whispering to the desperate. And when Elena Ramirez raised her trembling hand at the city auction, she had no idea she was claiming a building that had been hiding a $90 million secret beneath its rotting floorboards. A secret people once killed for. A secret someone still wants back, and tonight, that someone has finally found her. After the auctioneer's final echo faded into the hollow room, Elena Ramirez stepped into the biting air with that thin slip of paper clutched between her fingers, the deed that had cost her the last $100 she owned. The wind cut along the cracked sidewalk as if testing her resolve, tugging at her worn jacket, blowing strands of dark hair across her tired face. She stood there for a moment, staring at the paper, wondering if she had just saved her life, or destroyed what little hope she had left. Her breath trembled in the cold. Her shoulders sagged under months of fear she never admitted to anyone, not even to herself. But she couldn't stand still. Life never gave her the luxury, so she walked. Her boots scraped against broken pavement as she made her way toward the rusted building. She had somehow purchased a derelict restaurant buried in the forgotten strip of East Harbor Street, a place most people passed without looking, a place the city tried to demolish twice, a place that had been silent for so long it felt like even the wind avoided speaking its name. But tonight, it belonged to her. Her footsteps slowed as the hulking shape came into view, a sagging roofline, boarded windows, a faded sign hanging crooked like a tired arm. Vesaris, the ghostly letters still read, though half of them were swallowed by grime and time. Elena's heart pressed painfully against her ribs. She'd seen it before, of course. She'd walked by it for years. But she had never imagined it would be hers, not like this, not in desperation, not in the hollow space between survival and surrender. A heavy raindrop struck her cheek, then another. The sky grumbled like an old man disturbed from sleep. She swallowed hard. Her entire life had taught her to keep going, through working 2 jobs, through raising a daughter alone, through losing one job, then the next. Through eviction notices slid under the door like accusations, through choosing between groceries and rent, through praying quietly every night for a miracle that never seemed to come. But miracles don't always look holy. Sometimes they look like abandoned buildings with crooked signs. Elena approached the entrance, her hand trembling around the cold handle of the door. The rusted metal resisted her first pull, groaning as if waking from a long sleep. With a desperate shove, it finally gave way, releasing a cold breath of stale air and forgotten years. She stepped inside. Darkness swallowed her first. Then the faint smell of mildew, damp wood, and something older, something like burnt spices, lingering in an empty kitchen long after the last chef had left. The floor creaked beneath her weight, complaining softly. Dust floated in slow motion, illuminated by the thin sliver of streetlight crawling through a broken window. The silence inside was absolute, the kind that made you feel watched. Elena's breath hitched. She whispered to herself, "It's just a building, just walls, just wood, nothing more." But something in her chest tightened, as if some part of her already knew the truth that this place wasn't empty. Not really. It held stories, secrets, shadows of people who once stood right where she was standing. She took a few steps forward, her boots pressing softly against layers of dust. Chairs lay overturned across the main dining area, their legs snapped or missing. The bar counter was cracked, its varnish peeling like old skin. The walls were covered in a patchwork of grime and faded memories. And in the center of the room, beneath years of decay, sat the faint outline of one, elegant tiles now chipped, broken, but still clinging to the promise that this place had once held beauty. Lightning flickered outside, illuminating the room for a heartbeat. That's when she saw it, a long streak carved into the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged across it years ago. A path cutting from the center of the dining area toward the kitchen door. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. Her eyes narrowed. What happened here? She breathed. She had no answer, but she stepped forward anyway. Her hand brushed across a dusty table as she passed, leaving a trail behind. She imagined laughter once filled this room, families dining, couples sharing meals, celebrations echoing across the walls. That was before bankruptcy, before rumors swallowed the restaurant whole, before the strange headlines 20 years ago, before the sudden closure, before its owner vanished. But Elena didn't know all that yet. She only knew she needed a roof, a chance, a beginning. In the quiet space, a memory flickered. Her daughter, Marina, looking up at her that morning with wide brown eyes. "Mom, what will we do now?" Elena's chest tightened. This building wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. It was simply the last thing she could afford. The last thread she could grab before everything unraveled completely. Another step, another creak beneath her boots. She reached the kitchen doorway. The smell deepened: mold, rust, something long abandoned. As lightning flashed again, she spotted a rusted pot, still sitting on the stove, coated in thick dust, like the last meal was left behind in a hurry. Cabinets hung open, drawers overturned. A single plate lay shattered on the floor. Something inside her whispered, "Someone left this kitchen too fast." She crouched, touching one of the shards, cold, jagged, sharp. A sudden rumble of thunder shook the walls, and Elena straightened quickly, brushing off her knees. Her heart thumped harder than it should, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. "This is fine," she murmured. "It's all fixable." She said it again, just to hear confidence in her own voice. "It's fixable." She had patched holes in more than buildings her entire life. She could handle this. She had to. Marina trusted her. Tomorrow she would start cleaning, scrubbing, repairing, turning this place into something they could live in. Even if just temporarily. But something caught her eye as she turned toward the back hallway, a flicker of movement. A shadow, or simply a trick of lightning. She froze, pulse thundering in her ears. The hallway remained still. She exhaled shakily and forced herself to look around again, grounding herself in the present. The silence pressed in, thick and uneasy, but not threatening, not yet. The storm outside grew louder, rain hammering against the boarded windows like impatient fists. The restaurant trembled slightly, its old wooden bones creaking under the pressure, as if whispering warnings in a language she couldn't understand. Elena rubbed her fingertips along her temple. She was exhausted. Hope, fear, and hunger twisted together in her chest, draining the little strength she had left. She made her way back toward the front of the restaurant, each step slower than the last. The weight of the day finally dragged on her shoulders. She paused in the doorway, glancing once more at the cracked tiles beneath her feet. That was when she noticed it. An uneven patch in the floor, subtle but unmistakable, almost like the boards had shifted over time, or like they'd been tampered with. She crouched, brushing her hand over it. Dust broke apart under her touch. The board dipped slightly at one end, giving the faintest hollow echo when she pressed down. Her breath stilled. Was it just rotten wood, or something else? Her heart whispered questions her mind wasn't ready to face. Not tonight. She stood slowly, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up her spine. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her with a shaky twist of the old key. The storm roared, but she barely noticed it now, because as she walked away, The memory of that hollow thump echoed with every step she took, soft at first, then louder, haunting her thoughts with every beat of thunder. She didn't know it yet. But beneath that uneven patch of floor, beneath those creaking boards and tired tiles, beneath the dust and decay, her entire life was about to change, and not all miracles come with light. Some hide in darkness. As the storm deepened behind her, Elena had no idea that the story was only beginning. After leaving the restaurant behind and letting the storm swallow the night, Elena walked the long way home with rain soaking her clothes and numbing her fingers. But the echo of that hollow floorboard stayed, lodged in her chest like a warning she couldn't shake. By the time she reached the cramped, temporary room she and her daughter were renting, her body felt heavier than her soaked jacket. Marina was asleep on the small mattress pushed against the wall, her tiny legs curled up tight, her breathing soft, innocent, unaware of how close their world was to collapsing. Elena sank into the creaky chair in the corner, peeling off her wet coat with trembling hands. The dim light from the flickering bulb cast shadows across the thin wallpaper, turning the room into a faded map of worries. She placed the folded deed on the small table, smoothing it with care, as if pressing it might press her life back into order. A long breath escaped her. She should feel relieved. She should feel grateful. She should feel like she had won something. But instead, she felt the sharp ache of uncertainty gnawing at her ribs. Her eyes drifted to Marina. The little girl's hair fell in tangled curls across her cheek, dark lashes resting peacefully. Elena's heart tightened. Everything she did was for her. Every risk, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead and whispered, "I'll fix this, I promise." But promises were heavy things. She leaned back, letting exhaustion drag her under for a brief moment. The storm outside drummed against the window like distant footsteps. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she saw the restaurant again, the darkness, the dust, the uneven floor, the strange drag mark across the dining room. The open cabinets, the overturned plate. Someone had left in a hurry. Someone had walked out of that kitchen and never returned. Why? She rubbed her temples. She didn't need mysteries. She needed stability. She needed income. She needed a way to keep her head above the rising tide of bills and fear. Tomorrow would have to be better. When dawn finally crept across the sky, soft and gray, Elena woke with her cheek pressed against the table and the deed still beneath her hand. A thin streak of sunlight slipped through the blinds, brushing across the room like a fragile hope. Marina stirred, stretching with a soft groan. "Mom, did you find us a home?" Elena hesitated just for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes, baby, I did." Marina's tired eyes brightened just a little. "Can I see it today?" Elena forced a smile. "Yes, after breakfast." There wasn't much for breakfast: a half box of cereal, a few crackers, a single bruised apple. Elena split everything carefully, making sure Marina ate the most. As the little girl chatted about school and the drawing she wanted to hang in their new house, Elena listened with a soft ache blooming in her chest. Children had a way of believing in magic even when the world offered none. After getting dressed, Elena checked her bag, a toolkit with mismatched screwdrivers, a flashlight, gloves, and an old notebook filled with budgeting hopes that no longer added up. She locked the door behind them, and together they stepped into the cool morning. They took the bus to East Harbor Street. When they approached the restaurant, Marina's steps slowed, her small hand squeezing Elena's tightly. The building loomed against the sky like a tired giant leaning toward them. "Mom, is it safe?" Elena crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "It needs love, that's all." Marina nodded bravely, trusting her mother's voice more than her own fear. They stepped inside. The morning light softened the room in a way the storm never had. Dust still filled the air like suspended memories, but it didn't feel as menacing. It felt old, waiting, watching. Marina wrinkled her nose. It smells funny. It's just old wood, Elena said gently, though she wasn't fully sure. They began cleaning at least the surface. Elena opened windows to let fresh air push out the stale scent. She swept layers of dust into piles, each stroke revealing hidden parts of the floor. Marina picked up fallen utensils and stacked them on a counter that leaned to one side like a crooked smile. As they worked, sunlight slowly crawled across the floor, tracing the outline of the restaurant with warm hands. Hours passed. The room transformed slightly from suffocating to breathable, but Elena's eyes kept drifting to the uneven board near the center of the dining room. Every time she swept around it, she felt a quiet tug, a whisper, a question. She crouched again, pressing her palm lightly over the surface. Hollow, not soft, not broken, hollow. She tapped gently. The sound answered like a muted drum, deeper than the boards around it. Her stomach tightened. "Mom?" Marina asked from across the room, wiping dust from a chair with her sleeve. "What's that noise?" "Nothing," Elena said too quickly. "Just old flooring." But she didn't move. Her fingers traced the edges of the board. Their faint but real were markings that didn't match the others. Slight scratches, a nail that sat strangely flush, an edge that dipped lower. Someone had replaced this board, not recently, but intentionally. For a moment, fear rose through her like cold water. Then she stood. Her daughter was watching, and she couldn't afford to lose herself in paranoia. Not now. Not when she was trying to build a home, not tear it down with doubts. "Come on," she said softly. "Help me clean the back hallway." Together they moved further into the building, gathering trash, dragging out broken pieces of furniture, sweeping debris from corners where spiders had built kingdoms of silk. Marina hummed while she worked, her voice soft, carrying innocence through the dusty air. But every so often, a faint thump echoed in Elena's memory. That floorboard, that hollow sound, that strange drag mark on the tiles. By late afternoon, the sun dipped lower, turning the windows gold. The restaurant looked slightly less haunted, slightly more reclaimable. Elena leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her brow. Marina plopped down on one of the sturdier chairs. "This place is huge. It used to be popular," Elena said, scanning the worn decor. "People once loved coming here. What happened?" Elena paused. She didn't know the answer. The deed had come with no history, no warnings, no explanations. Just a signature, a date, and the city's eagerness to be rid of it. "Maybe the owner left," she said finally. "Maybe they had to leave quickly." Marina tilted her head. "Why quickly?" Elena didn't reply. But as she looked across the room, her gaze fell again on that uneven corner of the floor, on the way the boards didn't line up perfectly, on the faint scorch mark that ran beside it like a scar, on the idea, the unsettling possibility that something important lay beneath their feet. The air grew still for a heartbeat. A quiet tension settled over the room. "Mom," Marina's voice broke the moment. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." Elena nodded. "Yes, we've done enough for today." She packed their things, closed the door gently, locked it with the old, reluctant key. But as they walked away, twilight stretching long shadows behind them, Elena glanced over her shoulder one last time. The restaurant sat in silence, its windows glowing faintly with the last light of day. And for a split second a breath, a flicker, she thought she saw movement inside, a shift of shadow, a brief change in the light. But when she blinked it was gone. She told herself it was nothing. Just dust, just exhaustion, just her mind pulling tricks after a long day. She didn't yet know. The secrets beneath those floorboards had been waiting for decades, waiting for footsteps, waiting for hands, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to return. And now, at last, someone had. As evening settled into night and the last warmth slipped from the sky, Elena felt a quiet shiver crawl up her spine. The restaurant was far from done with her, and as darkness deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. After the restless night that followed their first day inside the abandoned restaurant, Elena returned at sunrise with a toolbox in one hand and the quiet determination of someone who had no choice but to make this place work. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the ocean several blocks away. Mist clung to the street like a thin veil, softening the edges of the broken storefronts around her. East Harbor Street looked calmer in the morning light, almost forgiving, as if offering her one more chance to change her life. She slipped the old key into the lock. The mechanism resisted, groaning, but then clicked open with a tired sigh. When she pushed the door inward, the familiar breath of stale air seeped around her, carrying dust, mildew, and the imprint of years left untouched. But morning sunlight spilled in behind her, slicing through the shadows and landing across the floor in warm, golden stripes. The beams revealed what yesterday's work had achieved: cleared pathways, cleaner air, a faint sense that the room was willing to remember its old glory. If she was willing to coax it back, "This is it," she whispered. "Today we make real progress." She set the toolbox on a nearby table, brushing off the dust with the side of her hand. As she looked around, her gaze drifted inevitably to that uneven patch in the floor, subtle, but impossible to forget. It lingered at the edges of her thoughts like an unfinished sentence, but she forced herself to look away. Not today. She had work to do. She started in the front, pulling down battered curtains, removing broken glass, picking up fallen boards. The more she cleared, the more the space opened up, revealing hints of what the restaurant used to be: elegant tile patterns beneath dirt, decorative trim along the walls, a row of old wine racks still intact behind the bar. The morning progressed slowly. Dust clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin, turning her into a ghost among ghosts, but she pushed on, driven by the quiet fire in her chest. Hours later, the soft pitter of footsteps entered the doorway. "Mom," Elena turned to see Marina standing there, clutching her backpack. The little girl blinked up at the dim room with wide, curious eyes. Elena smiled softly. "How was school?" "Okay," Marina said, stepping inside. "I told my teacher we're moving into a restaurant. She said that's unusual." Elena snorted gently. "She's not wrong." Marina dropped her bag onto a clean section of the floor. "Can I help again?" "Of course," Elena said, handing her a pair of gloves. "But start with something small. Maybe clean the host stand." Marina darted off with a grin. Elena took a deep breath and returned to her own work, heading into the back hallway where shadows stretched long against the walls. She began removing old posters and broken hooks, stacking them neatly for disposal. Yet as she moved deeper into the corridor, she found something she hadn't noticed the day before. A doorway she assumed was just a pantry wasn't fully closed. Its frame sat crooked, misaligned, as if someone had shoved it too hard in the past. Curiosity pricked at her. She pulled gently at the handle. The door creaked open. A narrow storage room revealed itself, filled with crates stacked haphazardly and shelves coated in thick dust. Cobwebs draped from corners like abandoned curtains. Elena stepped inside slowly, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The air felt heavy, still, as though time had stopped here long before. The rest of the building fell silent. She scanned the shelves, rusted spatulas, unopened jars of spices long expired, empty wine bottles. Then her light stopped on something strange, a small wooden box wedged at the back of the top shelf. Its lid was carved with spiraled patterns, old but carefully crafted. She reached up and slid it forward. The movement stirred dust into the air like a sigh. Elena held the box in her hands for a moment. It felt unexpectedly heavy, solid. She carried it out into the hallway and opened it carefully. Inside lay papers, old menus, faded receipts, and beneath them something unexpected, a leather-bound ledger. Her breath hitched. She lifted it gently, brushing off the dust. The cover was cracked with age, its leather soft like worn fabric. On the front, faintly embossed, were the initials MV. She didn't know who that was, but the building once had a name, Vasari's. Her hands tingled. She opened the ledger. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting, numbers, quantities, notes about ingredients and daily sales. A chef's record, a restaurant owner's log. But a dozen pages in, the tone changed. The lines became hurried, the ink darker. Pressing harder against the paper, the notes shifted from simple business entries to emotional confessions. They came after closing. I heard them in the hallway again. The money is safe, but for how long? Elena's breath froze. She turned the page. I didn't want this. I just wanted to cook. But once you owe them, you don't get to walk away. Her pulse pounded behind her ears. She flipped another page. If anything happens to me, the truth is beneath their feet. A cold shiver crawled up her spine. Beneath their feet. Elena slammed the ledger shut without meaning to. Her fingers trembled. That uneven board, that hollow echo, that strange drag mark across the tiles. Suddenly everything she tried to ignore pulsed with new significance. She stood there for a long moment, breathing carefully, grounding herself as fear and curiosity twisted in her chest like entwined vines. She needed clarity. She needed calm. So she walked back to the dining area, trying to steady her thoughts. Marina looked up from the host stand. Mom, are you okay? Elena forced a smile. Just found something old. What is it? A book. Nothing important, but the way her voice cracked revealed everything she couldn't say. Marina wandered over, eyes drifting to the ledger in Elena's hands. Is it like a diary? I have one at school. Something like that, Elena murmured. She set the ledger gently on a table, resisting the urge to open it again. Answers could wait. It was more important to finish today's goal. She had to focus on cleaning, not mysteries, on survival, not secrets. She grabbed a broom and headed toward the far corner, but the weight of the ledger followed her like a whisper. Afternoon turned into early evening. They scrubbed surfaces, wiped windows, dragged broken furniture out the back door into the alley. The place still looked rough, old paint peeling, cracks in the ceiling, dirt that refused to surrender, but there was movement, purpose, transformation. Even the air smelled different, less like a grave of forgotten dreams and more like a space reclaiming breath. At sunset, Marina yawned, curling up in one of the booths, her head resting on a cushion Elena had dusted earlier. Her small form looked peaceful against the glow of orange light filtering through the windows. Elena covered her gently with her jacket and continued cleaning around her, quietly, but each step brought her closer and closer to that uneven board. By the time the sun fully dipped behind the horizon, the room was swallowed again by shadows. That's when it happened. Elena accidentally dropped the broom. It hit the floor with a loud clatter, and the sound that followed didn't echo like wood on wood. It echoed like wood on emptiness, hollow, deep, almost metallic. Elena froze, her breath lodged in her throat. She crouched slowly, pressing her hand over the exact spot the broom had landed. She tapped once. The sound answered immediately, a low, muffled thump. Her pulse hammered. She tapped again. Same answer, same hollow whisper. Her fingertips began to tremble. This wasn't rotten wood. This wasn't natural shifting. This was deliberate. Someone had hidden something beneath this floor. Her eyes widened. The ledger's words screamed in her memory. The truth is beneath their feet. She stood abruptly, her breath unsteady, scanning the room as if expecting the shadows to move. But everything remained still. Marina slept quietly in the booth, unaware of the storm building inside her mother. Elena backed away from the hollow board, her mind racing. Her instincts warred with each other, fear urging her to walk out, curiosity urging her to rip the floor open. responsibility whispering that she needed to protect her daughter first. She grabbed her toolbox, her fingers hovered over the crowbar. For a long moment she didn't move, then slowly she pulled the crowbar free. She walked toward the uneven board with measured steps, each one heavier than the last. She knelt beside the spot, pressing the metal tool against the seam. Her breath hitched as she applied pressure. The board groaned. Then a sharp creak split through the silence. The edge of the board lifted, just slightly, enough to reveal darkness where solid ground should have been, enough to confirm everything she feared, enough to start something she could never undo. Elena released the crowbar and sat back on her heels, chest rising and falling quickly. She wasn't ready, not tonight, not alone. Not with Marina nearby. She gently pressed the board back down, ensuring it settled flush again. Her hands shook as she stood, wiping her palms on her jeans. She moved to the booth and shook her daughter softly. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "time to go home." Marina blinked groggily. "Already?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice tight. "We need rest." They left quietly. Elena locked the door behind her, gripping the key until her knuckles turned white. The truth beneath those floorboards wasn't going anywhere. But tonight, she had to face something even more unsettling, the realization that the abandoned restaurant she thought was simply a burden was hiding something that wanted to be found. And as the night settled over the street, heavy and absolute, Elena couldn't escape the feeling that once she opened that floor, really opened it, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The darkness deepened, and the story was only beginning. After the night pressed itself heavy across the city, Elena slept restlessly, turning over every creak, every hollow echo, every line from the ledger repeating in her mind like a broken chorus. When dawn finally arrived, pale and hesitant, she woke with the feeling that her life was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't yet name. Marina still slept soundly beside her, curled up beneath a thin blanket. Elena watched her for a long moment, taking in the quiet rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the smallness of her hands, the innocence she wished she could protect forever. The world had already stolen too much from her. Elena wouldn't allow it to take more, but the ledger, the floorboard, the hollow sound, they clawed at her thoughts. By the time the sun stretched its first rays across the sky, she had already made her decision. She would return to the restaurant alone. She would investigate. She would learn what this building was trying to hide and whether the secret within it threatened their life or their chance at a future. She dressed quietly, leaving a note for Marina on the small kitchen table. "Back soon. Stay inside. I love you." She kissed her daughter's forehead, then stepped out into the cool morning air. East Harbor Street was quiet when she arrived, the morning mist creeping low across the pavement. The restaurant loomed ahead, its faded letters barely visible through the haze. Elena unlocked the door with steady hands she didn't quite feel. Inside, the silence greeted her like an old acquaintance, thick, watchful, familiar now in its heaviness. She stepped forward, letting the light spill across the room as she opened a few more windows. Dust drifted lazily through the beams, swirling like tired spirits. Waking from sleep, she set her bag down beside the bar, her gaze instinctively drifting toward the ledger she had left behind the night before. But it wasn't where she left it. Her breath stilled. The journal, once lying on a dusty table, had been moved slightly. Not far, just a tilt, a shift, but enough to tell her that something or someone had touched it. Her heartbeat tightened. She scanned the room. Nothing moved, no footprints, no displaced tools, just that subtle shift. She approached the table slowly and placed a hand on the ledger, as if reassuring herself it was real. "Maybe I moved it," she whispered aloud, though she didn't believe it. Pushing fear aside, she gathered her tools and walked toward the uneven floorboard, the place where the air felt thickest, where secrets pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the wood. The restaurant was fully silent now, too silent. As if holding its breath, Elena knelt down, her fingers hovered above the board, remembering the sound, the weight, the dread it carried. She slid the crowbar into the seam and braced herself. This time she didn't hesitate. She pressed downward with more force than the night before. The board creaked, sharply splitting the quiet in two. Dust scattered upward as the wood lifted from its frame. She pulled it aside and set it carefully on the floor. A dark, narrow space yawned beneath her. The air that escaped was colder than the room above, colder than it should have been. As if sealed away from sunlight for decades, Elena held her breath and leaned closer. What she saw wasn't dirt or crawlspace foundation. It wasn't empty earth or forgotten plumbing. It was structure, wooden beams forming a low, hidden chamber. The faint outline of something beneath them, shapes wrapped in cloth, edges of boxes, maybe containers. Her pulse pounded. She grabbed her flashlight, switched it on, and directed the beam downward. The light cut through the darkness. Her breath caught. Below her were several objects arranged tightly against each other: containers, sealed packages, a locked metal trunk. Dust coated everything like gray snow, but nothing looked rotted. Nothing looked like it had been casually tossed there. Someone had arranged these things carefully, deliberately, secretly. A chill slid down her arms, but something else stood out, something even stranger. One of the containers had scorch marks along the side, dark and irregular, as if it had been heated or burned long ago. Another had what looked like letters carved faintly into the wood, though she couldn't read them from this angle. She swallowed hard. She had to go down. The space wasn't large, she would barely fit, but she couldn't ignore it, not after everything she'd seen, not after what the ledger implied. She lowered herself slowly, feet first, carefully gripping the edges of the opening. The hidden chamber was cramped, forcing her to crouch once she reached the bottom. The air was cold enough to sting her lungs. The flashlight beam moved across each object as she steadied herself. She reached toward the closest container, a wooden crate sealed with rusted nails. The lid was warped slightly. She pried it open gently. Inside was paper, stacks of it, bundles wrapped with old twine. She pulled one out. It was money, old bills, crisp despite their age, bound tightly, stacked neatly, dozens, maybe hundreds. Her hands shook. She opened another bundle, more money, more stacks, more neat rows of bills. Her breath turned shallow. She set the cash aside and aimed her flashlight toward the metal trunk. In the corner, its latch was thick, rusted, locked. But what caught her attention wasn't the lock, it was the symbol etched into the lid. A simple emblem, two interlocking rings, familiar somehow. She reached out and touched it, tracing its outline. Cold, heavy, purposeful. She shined her light around again. More crates, more bundles, more signs of rushed, deliberate hiding. She stepped closer to the trunk. Her fingers found the seam where the lid met the base. Locked. But less important than the realization settling over her, this wasn't a random stash. This wasn't forgotten storage. This was the beginning of something much larger, something buried for a reason. The ledger's words echoed again in her mind. They came after closing. The money is safe, but for how long, if anything happens to me? The truth is beneath their feet. Even as the air grew colder around her, sweat began to form at the back of her neck. She wasn't supposed to find this, not her, not anyone. She reached toward the metal trunk again, gripping the handles as if weighing its significance. Suddenly a thump echoed above her, soft, quick, deliberate to be the settling of old wood. Elena froze. Her light shook in her hand as she listened, her ears straining to catch any sound from above. Silence, then another thump, closer, heavier. Someone was in the restaurant. Her heart jolted violently. Slowly, silently, she moved toward the opening she had climbed through. She angled her body and pressed her ear against the underside of the floor. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving across the dining room. Her breath stopped. This wasn't Marina. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't anyone she expected. Her hands trembled as she turned off the flashlight. Darkness wrapped around her like a cold cloak. The footsteps paused directly above her. Her pulse pounded so hard it felt like it might echo up through the floor. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to quiet her breath. The footsteps moved again, heading toward the front door. A moment of tense silence. Then the door creaked open, closed. The footsteps faded outside. Elena remained in the dark for several long minutes, afraid to move, afraid of what or who waited beyond the shadows. Only when her legs tingled painfully did she climb out from beneath the floor. The dining room was empty, still, deceptively calm. She scanned every corner, every window, every doorway. Whoever had been inside was gone now, but they had been real, and they had known where to look. Her gaze drifted to the ledger again. This building wasn't abandoned, it was watched. She locked the door with shaking hands, gripping the key so tightly the metal dug into her palm. She backed away slowly, as if fearing the walls might shift or whisper. When she finally stepped out onto the street, the air felt colder, sharper, more dangerous. She didn't know yet what she had uncovered, but she understood one thing. Someone else knew too. Someone who wasn't ready to let the past stay buried. Someone who wanted what was hidden beneath those boards. As twilight stretched across the sky like a dark veil, Elena realized the truth. She had entered a story far older and far darker than she ever imagined, and the deeper she went, the harder it would be to escape. As night settled fully across East Harbor Street, one thing became painfully clear. The secrets of Versailles had just begun to wake. After the sun rose behind a curtain of muted gray clouds, Elena returned to the restaurant with the heavy knowledge of what she had uncovered and the heavier fear of what she had heard above her the day before. Her hands trembled only slightly as she unlocked the door, but her mind felt sharper now, clearer, as if purpose had burned away the fog of confusion. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, listening for anything unusual. The air was still, too still. Not a whisper of movement, not a shift in the wood, not even the gentle creak of settling beams. But silence could be deceptive. She moved cautiously across the room until she reached the uneven floorboard once more. This was where her world had cracked open, where innocence had ended, where truth had first breathed against her spine. She crouched and pressed her fingertips to the board, feeling the faint vibrations of memory, the shock of finding money, the burn of the ledger's words, the terror of those footsteps that had no face and no mercy. But this morning she wasn't here to hide from the mystery. She was here to confront it. With steady breath, she lifted the board again, exposing the dark chamber below. The cold air rose like a whisper against her skin. She lowered herself into the space once more, flashlight guiding her descent. The hidden chamber greeted her with its quiet chill, the stored containers standing like silent witnesses to a crime long buried. She placed the flashlight on one of the crates and pulled out several bundles of old cash again, counting them quickly. This was no small stash. This wasn't forgotten pocket change. This was life-changing money, life-saving money, money that should have pulled its owner out of darkness, not buried him deeper into it. She set the bundles aside and inspected another crate, prying it open to reveal metal tins sealed with heavy tape. The labels were faded, smudged beyond recognition. When she knocked gently against one, it echoed with an unsettling metallic ring, not empty, not filled with grain or spices. Something dense, something valuable. She swallowed, then turned her attention back to the locked steel trunk. It sat slightly crooked in the corner, burn marks etched along its hinges, as though someone had once attempted to destroy whatever it guarded. Elena brushed her fingers over the symbol on its lid, the two interlocking rings, simple yet ominous. Something about it tugged at her memory, like a half-forgotten detail she couldn't place. She gripped the lock, cold, immovable. She needed tools, stronger ones. As she climbed back up into the dining room, her foot brushed against something near the opening. She turned, frowning. A folded piece of paper lay there, half-tucked beneath the lifted floorboard. Her stomach dropped. That wasn't there before. She picked it up with careful fingers. The paper was older than anything she had touched in the restaurant, so far yellowed, edges brittle, faintly smelling of smoke. She unfolded it slowly, fearing what message it might carry. One line, written in frantic, uneven handwriting, he knows. The words slammed into her chest like a blow. She dropped the paper onto the table, her breath unraveling as she stepped backward. He knows. Who was he, and what did he know? Her mind flashed back to the footsteps above her yesterday, the measured pace, the heavy tread, the slow, intentional movement of someone not surprised to find unlocked mysteries, someone who had been watching this place, someone connected to the ledger, someone who had been waiting for the right time to return. Elena's pulse hammered as she scanned the room again, the windows, the hallway, the shadows. Every corner now looked deeper, darker, more capable of hiding something or someone. She moved toward the front door and locked it again, twisting the bolt until it clanked firmly in place. Then she returned to the paper, picking it up once more. The handwriting was desperate, slanted, the ink smudged as if written in haste. She flipped it over and noticed faint indentations on the back, traces of something written before it, faint enough to be invisible, but clear enough for her fingers to feel. She pressed the paper against the counter, smoothing it carefully, then held her flashlight at a shallow angle. The light caught the grooves, revealing a partial phrase etched into the fibers. "Don't let him find the rest." Her breath hitched. The rest of what? A cold realization tightened her chest. The money beneath the floor wasn't the only secret in this building. Something else was hidden, something bigger, something someone had risked their life to hide and maybe died for. Elena gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. She had come looking for a fresh start, a patch of hope in a life collapsing under the weight of bills and fear. Instead, she had inherited a labyrinth of dangers. "Stay calm," she whispered. "Focus." She walked back to the hollow section of the floor, staring at it with new eyes. Whoever left that note had wanted to warn someone, had wanted this secret to be protected. But protected from whom? Her mind reached again for the faint sound from yesterday. Someone inside. Someone searching. Someone determined. She felt heat climb through her chest. Fear, yes, but something stronger too. Determination. She had survived too much in life to walk away from truth now. She had a daughter to protect. If this building held danger, she needed to uncover every hidden corner before danger found them first. She kneels again, peering into the darkness below. This time, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a faint glimmer beneath the metal trunk. Something metallic reflecting her flashlight. She lowered herself into the chamber once more, crawling toward the trunk with controlled breaths. The glimmer was subtle, disappearing when she moved the light too quickly. She shifted her angle. A key, small, rusted, wedged between two wood planks, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. She reached for it carefully, pulling it free with stiff fingers. The metal felt brittle but not broken. Could it be the key to the trunk? Only one way to know. She positioned herself in front of the trunk and inserted the key into the lock. It resisted at first, grinding as if reluctant to remember its purpose. She jiggled it gently. The metal scraped, groaned, clicked. Her heartbeat surged. The latch popped open with a sharp metallic snap. She hesitated, breathing deep, steadying her hands. Then she lifted the lid. Inside lay papers, documents, photographs, a rolled-up blueprint, a leather pouch sealed with wax, another notebook, smaller, darker, more worn than first. Her flashlight trembled as it illuminated each item. She lifted one of the photographs. A young man stood in the old restaurant kitchen, smiling as he held a pan over a stove. Flour dusted his apron. Another man stood beside him, older, with sharp eyes and a shadowed expression. The back of the photo was labeled, "Matteo and Lorenzo, 1999. Elena's breath caught. Matteo, the name from the ledger's initials, the missing owner, and Lorenzo, the brother mentioned in the news articles she vaguely remembered, the one rumored to have been tied to dangerous people. Her hands shook. She lifted another document, a newspaper clipping, crinkled and brittle with time. The headline read, Local chef missing Vasari's closes overnight. Her vision blurred for a moment, heart pounding as if each syllable was a hammer striking bone. She read the article quickly. Matteo Vasari vanished one night. Restaurant closed without warning. Family silent. Police baffled. Rumors of debts. Rumors of criminal ties. Rumors of money that disappeared with him. Rumors about this very building. She dropped the paper, chest tightening. Everything pointed to one truth: this restaurant hadn't been abandoned. It had been sealed like a tomb, to hide something, or someone. She reached for the second notebook, the darker one, and opened it carefully. The first page made her blood run cold. If you are reading this, it means I failed. Her breath froze. She leaned closer, reading the next line. The money beneath the floor is only the beginning. The blueprint holds the real secret. The syndicate will come for it, and my brother, he will not forgive betrayal. Her pulse pounded louder. She flipped the page. Do not trust anyone who searches this place. Do not trust any man in a dark coat. Her heart lurched. The footsteps, the moved ledger, the note left on the floor. Someone had already come, already searched, already watched. She read the final line written on the open page. If you value your life, leave now. But Elena didn't close the notebook. She didn't climb out. She didn't run. She wasn't built to run. Her daughter depended on her, and this secret, whatever it was, threatened everything she was trying to protect. She lifted the rolled blueprint from the trunk and carried it up into the dining room, unfurling it across a table. Lines, measurements, walls, hidden compartments, markings beneath the building, something labeled Vault Room B. Her legs weakened. There was more, much more. Another chamber beneath the restaurant, deeper, larger, sealed. The money she had found was nothing compared to what lay further below. A soft crack echoed from the hallway. Elena stiffened. Someone was inside, again. Her breath caught. Her muscles tightened. The air thinned. Then a silhouette shifted at the edge of the cracked doorway. Tall, still, watching her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She recognized the outline, the dark coat, the rigid posture, the same figure she glimpsed the night she bought the restaurant. Lorenzo. Her stomach dropped. He stepped forward, silence stretching. Elena took one small step back. The truth beneath the floor had awakened, and the man tied to its darkest secrets had finally come for her. As the room dimmed around her, she realized the story was only beginning. The restaurant held its breath, the dust suspended in the air between Elena and the dark silhouette, wet as if waiting for one of them to shatter the silence first. The man in the long dark coat stood framed in the dim hallway light, his presence sharp and heavy like a shadow pulled into human form. Elena's fingers curled instinctively around the edge of the table where the blueprint lay unfurled. The paper trembled beneath her hand. Her voice stayed locked in her throat, trapped somewhere between fear and disbelief. The man stepped forward, not rushing, not threatening, simply walking with the deliberate calm of someone who had already measured the room, already mapped the exits, already decided exactly how this encounter would go. His boots tapped softly against the old floorboards, each step echoing with a patience far more dangerous than anger. Elena swallowed hard. He stopped a few feet from her, dim evening light falling across his face at last. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a calm expression that didn't match the tension thrumming through the air. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like someone who belonged here, and that made him infinitely more frightening. "You found it," he said quietly, his voice smooth, almost tired. "I figured you would." Elena tried to keep her breathing steady. Who are you?" He glanced around the room, his gaze drifting from the lifted floorboard to the ledger on the table, to the blueprint she had spread out, the blueprint she suddenly wished she had never touched. "I'm someone who knows this place better than anyone," he said. "Better than you. Better than the city. Better than the people who came before you." His eyes locked onto hers. "Better than my brother ever did." The word hit her like a blow. Brother. Her blood ran cold. She barely whispered. Lorenzo Vasari. He finished. The name slid into the air like a blade. Elena stepped back instinctively, her pulse roaring in her ears. The photo from the trunk flashed through her mind, two brothers in a kitchen, one smiling, one shadowed. Now she knew which one stood before her. Lorenzo glanced toward the open floorboard, chest rising slowly, as if decades of buried memories were seeping out from the darkness below. "You weren't meant to find any of this," he said softly. "No one was." Elena's hands trembled. Then why was it here? Why bury something like this under the floor? He let out a quiet breath, the corner of his mouth tightening, because Matteo trusted the wrong people. And when he realized it, it was already too late. His words weren't laced with sorrow. They carried something heavier, a bitterness that had aged poorly. Elena clenched her fists. "If you know what happened, then why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell the police? Why didn't you tell them what?" He cut in sharply, stepping closer. "That my brother stole from men who don't forgive, and that he died trying to run from them. That the fortune they were hunting ended up in a hole under rotting floorboards. That the man they were looking for simply vanished." His voice trembled for the first time, anger flickering beneath it like heat rising from coals. "Or should I tell them," he continued, "that the same men are still watching this place, waiting for the moment it opens again?" Elena's breath snagged, still watching, still waiting. Her mind jumped instantly to the footsteps above her the day before, the note, the moved ledger, the unease that had crept along her spine. "You were here yesterday." She whispered, "No." His answer came quickly, firmly, "But someone else was." The room tilted slightly. Fear tightened around her ribs like a vise. He took another step, his posture tense but not yet violent. "You shouldn't have opened anything," he said, his voice low. "You don't understand what you've stepped into." Elena lifted her chin despite the fear shaking her bones. "I didn't step into anything. I bought a building at an auction, that's all." Lorenzo's eyes darkened. "No, that's where you're wrong. You didn't buy a building. You walked into a grave." The words chilled her blood. He stared at her for a long moment, measuring her resolve, weighing her presence, deciding something she couldn't read in his expression. Then his gaze dropped to the blueprint. He reached out slowly and touched the corner of it. Elena flinched. He paused, raising an eyebrow. "If I wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, "I wouldn't be wasting time talking. Trust me on that." She hated how her stomach twisted at his calmness. He unrolled the blueprint further with the back of his knuckles, revealing another section of the structure: underground chambers, hidden corridors, markings she hadn't deciphered yet. Elena's voice broke. "What is all of this?" His jaw clenched. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is everything Matteo died trying to protect." Silence pressed in again, heaviness pooling in the cracks of the room. Elena tried to breathe through it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why hide all of this in a restaurant?" Lorenzo exhaled slowly, turning his gaze to the far corner of the room where the tiles had cracked longest ago. His tone dropped lower, almost hollow, because this was the only place he trusted. He said, "His dream. His sanctuary, his curse." His voice faltered just once. Then he added, "And because he thought I would find it one day, he thought I could fix what he broke." A bitter laugh escaped him. He never imagined a stranger would uncover it first. Elena shook her head, stepping away as fear and defiance battled inside her. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't ask for it. I just needed a home." Lorenzo's eyes softened just enough to show he believed her. "That doesn't matter now," he said. "The moment you touched those floorboards, your life became tied to his." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be tied to anything," she whispered. "You don't have a choice." The bluntness cut deep. He reached into his coat, and Elena stiffened, but he pulled out nothing more than a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table between them, a faded envelope sealed decades ago, Matteo's name written across the front. "You should read it," Lorenzo said. He left it in the trunk, probably for me, but I think... He hesitated. I think he meant for someone else to see it first. Elena's fingers hovered over the envelope. She didn't touch it. Lorenzo stepped back, his figure retreating toward the exit, as if his presence had completed its purpose for now. He paused by the door, resting his hand on the handle. His final words were barely above a murmur. "You're in danger, Elena, and so is your daughter. Whatever you choose next, choose it fast." He slipped into the dim corridor beyond, swallowed by shadow, leaving the door slightly ajar. The silence that followed felt heavier than his presence. Elena stood alone at the table, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope Matteo had left behind. She stared at his name, the faded ink, the fragile paper holding secrets older than her problems, older than her struggles, older than her hope. She felt the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing against her spine. Slowly, with a breath unsteady and thin, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. Handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the first line was clear: "If someone finds this, please finish what I could not." Elena felt her heart fracture into both fear and fate. The restaurant wasn't done with her, and as the room dimmed into early night, she realized the story was only beginning. After Lorenzo's warning drained into the silence of the abandoned restaurant, Elena stood frozen in the dim light, clutching Matteo's letter as if it were a fragile bridge between her world and the one she had stepped into without meaning to. The air felt colder now, thick with the weight of secrets that had slept for decades and were no longer willing to stay silent. Morning crept slowly across the windows, brushing the dust with pale gold, but the light did nothing to soften the fear clawing at her ribs. Her fingers trembled as she ran them along Matteo's uneven handwriting. "Finish what I could not." The words sat like coals in her palm, burning through every layer of denial she had tried to build. Since the first day she walked into this place, she had wanted a fresh start, a roof, a chance, a place to rebuild her life. Instead, she had been handed the remains of a man's last desperate act. She took a slow breath and forced herself to read the letter again from the beginning. Matteo's voice, broken, frightened, and determined, spilled from the page with a weight she could feel pressing against her chest. "If someone finds this, then the choices I made have finally caught up to me. I never meant for any of this. I never meant to be part of them, but once you take their money, you belong to them. I hid what I could. I prayed Lorenzo would stay away, but he's too loyal, too stubborn. He will come looking. If you found the chamber, know that it's not the only one. There is more, and they will kill to reclaim it." Elena's hands shook harder with every line. She closed her eyes, swallowing the rising panic. There was more than the crates.